Welcome to BBC News Now. We begin with the breaking news that Iran's supreme leader has appeared on state television claiming victory over Israel and downplaying the impact of US airstrikes on his country's nuclear program. It's the first time Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has appeared in public since the ceasefire halted days of missile and airstrikes between the two countries. And with me here in the studio is Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian, part of BBC World Service. Siavash, we've heard rhetoric from the United States and from Israel on what's been happening between Israel and Iran. Now more rhetoric from the supreme leader of the country. Just to analyse for us what he's been saying.
Well, it wasn't a public message. It was delivered, pre-recorded in an undisclosed location, which is where he probably has been since the beginning of the war, when the Israelis numerously tried to talk, at least spoke of assassinating him. Predictably, he presented Iran as the victorious side in this war, very much along the side of the narrative that state media has been pushing over the past 2 days since the ceasefire came into effect, that Iran managed to defeat Israel, managed to impose a peace both on the US and Israel. So the supreme leader here congratulates the Iranian nation on two counts, on counts of defeating Israel, crushing Israel, and also on defeating the United States, making direct references to President Trump's statements yesterday about the Iranian attack on the US military base, saying that that attack, in fact, did inflict damages on that military base, and the fact that the US became involved in this war in favor of Israel indicates and is proof of the fact that Iran was winning.
And saying that the US president needed to do showmanship. That was the quote from the Ayatollah. It's going to be interesting to see how the US Defense Secretary responds to these comments in the press conference we're expecting in the next hour. And how, Siavash, does this set up potential talks between the US and Iran that Donald Trump alluded to yesterday?
Well, we know the talks are taking place next week. That's what President Trump said yesterday. Now, depending on whose side you listen to, President Trump made it sound very easy. We're just going to hand them a piece of paper. They're going to sign it. We destroyed their nuclear industry. They don't have a nuclear weapons capability, so there's nothing really to talk about. There is no need really to engage in very deep, lengthy negotiations. Whereas what the Ayatollah is saying is very different. He is saying that US's attacks did not inflicts significant damage on Iran's nuclear centers. Very much at the same time when in the US it's embroiled in its own controversy over how much damage has been inflicted. He said it didn't inflict significant damage. The issue of nuclear enrichment was just an excuse for an attack. He didn't say that Iran will continue to stand by the enrichment issue, but he said they're asking for our surrender, sometime under the guise of ending enrichment, sometime under the guise of human rights, sometime under the guise of missiles, but we will not surrender.
So finally, beyond that rhetoric, though, privately, do you think the Iranian regime is ready to negotiate with the US, is ready to come to some kind of accommodation?
Well, we have to really see, because we're not getting the same kind of messages coming from the foreign ministry wing of the regime and the more hardline groups within the political establishment. Whether Iran will continue to insist on enrichment, how really steadfast it will try to be in sticking to its guns, we have to see, because what the supreme leader said today sounded very uncompromising. On some Iranian critics, in their view, disconnected from reality, and other people's view, what you would expect from the supreme leader of a country who's just emerged from war.
OK, Siavash, really good to get your analysis. Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian. Well, let's discuss this further now and cross live to my colleague Mark Lowen, who is in Tel Aviv. Mark.
Anita, thanks very much indeed. Yes, as we've just been hearing, the supreme leader of Iran suggests that the damage to Iran's nuclear facilities has been overplayed by the United States. That goes in contradiction to the words of America's top intelligence official, the CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who came out with an assessment saying that Iran's facilities had been severely damaged and its nuclear program set back by several years, but he fell short of saying that it had been completely destroyed. Key Trump administration officials in recent days, including the president himself, have been repeating constantly that the sites in Iran have been completely obliterated. An Israeli assessment says that the US bombing, combined with its own attacks, set back by years Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. A leaked Pentagon assessment had earlier suggested that Iran's program had probably only been set back by a few months. Well, let's bring in our correspondent Dan Johnson, who is live with us from Jerusalem. Dan, we've just heard there from Iran's supreme leader, framing it as a victory for Iran, pretty much diametrically opposed to how Israel is framing it.
Absolutely, yes. Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly reasserted how effective the strikes that his country, with the support of the Americans, launched on Iran's nuclear program. He said that the conflict lasting 12 days had successfully eradicated the dual threats of the Iranian nuclear facilities and also the ballistic missile threat that Iran had posed to this country. There's been the back and forth that we've seen of different intelligence assessments, the US president's account of this, different versions of exactly how destructive those strikes were and how far back Iran's nuclear program had been set. The Ayatollah telling his people that his country had come through this conflict with its nuclear facilities intact, essentially, and that it had been able to launch strikes that had a devastating effect on this country, Israel.
Yeah, and also saying that Iran had inflicted damage on that US airbase in Qatar, the Al Udeid base. Yesterday, Donald Trump was saying that Iran called us up and said, is it okay if we strike at 1 a.m? And we said it's fine. So, obviously, again, very different narratives there. Meanwhile, Dan, just give us the latest on a rather unusual intervention by Donald Trump into Benjamin Netanyahu's legal woes here in Israel.
Yes, after the seemingly tense exchange between the two leaders at the start of this ceasefire, when Donald Trump's understood to have phoned Benjamin Netanyahu to tell him to call back the Israeli planes that were heading to Iran to potentially launch another set of attacks after the perceived violation of that ceasefire. The US president seems to be trying to rebuild his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu and indeed to intervene in the court case that Benjamin Netanyahu's been involved in for many months, if not years now. Quite an extraordinary posting on Donald Trump's Truth Social network, calling Benjamin Netanyahu a great wartime prime minister, a warrior who's facing a ridiculous witch hunt. He says that they went through hell together and that Benjamin Netanyahu could not have been better, sharper or stronger. He's again reiterated the elimination of Iran's nuclear weapons and that they've been fighting for the survival of Israel. He says he's just found out that Netanyahu's going to be summoned to court again next week in that trial where Benjamin Netanyahu's accused of corruption. Trump said that trial is politically motivated, a horror show which ought to be cancelled, or that Netanyahu should be pardoned for. He said it's a travesty of justice and that after saving Israel, the US will now save Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, staggering intervention in a country supposedly with an independent judiciary. Dan Johnson in Jerusalem, thanks very much indeed. Let's bring in Hassan Ahmadian, who is an assistant professor of Middle East and North Africa studies at the University of Tehran. Hassan, very good to have you with us. Thanks for sparing the time. What do you make, first of all, of the intervention by the Iranian supreme leader, framing this as a complete victory? Are Iranians going to buy that?
I think it's clear that Iran has suffered a lot during the 12 days. Its infrastructure has been hit, its defenses have been hit. But at the same time, the Iranians also retaliated and moved to proportionality by the end of the war. President Trump has said himself that the 2 last days of the war were devastating for the Israelis, and I buy that because the proportionality was there. Whatever the Israelis were hitting, the Iranians were hitting back. And his victory rhetoric is placed on the fact that whatever Bibi Netanyahu announced in the initial phase of the war did not materialize. He had lots of things in his announcement, and none of them actually has been achieved. Now, the nuclear program is still under investigation or under assessment within Iran to see how much it was damaged. But at the same time, to say that it was done with is a bit of an exaggeration, I would suppose, because it's still unclear what happened to this program. And still the Europeans, the E3 has called for negotiations as the best way for solving or resolving the Iranian nuclear standoff, which suggests that the nuclear program is still there, functioning, though received some sort of damage there.
Well, given that, Hassan, a very interesting line also coming through this morning. The parliamentary bill to suspend Iran's cooperation with the new UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has been ratified by the Guardian Council, apparently, in Iran. That's the panel of clerics and jurists who vet legislation. If that is going to go through, could that scupper any hopes of further talks between the US and Iran? Donald Trump said yesterday that they were going to meet again next week. But if Iran is going to pull out of cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog, what incentive is there for any more talks on the nuclear program?
I think these are two separate issues. The Iran-IAEA cooperation happens under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran is party to. But the Iranians were surprised to see their country and their nuclear infrastructure being attacked by two nuclear powers, one in the region and one international. Their nuclear infrastructure that were under IAEA supervision were attacked. And the IAEA did not even issue a statement of condemnation, which is against the treaty, basically. So the Iranians saw the last announcement by the IAEA as an excuse that was used for a war to be waged on Iran, and they are not willing to continue cooperating with it because it's not providing Iran with its rights within the treaty, whereas it's asking a lot.
Hassan Ahmadian, I'm going to have to jump in. We're running out of time. Thanks very much indeed for your thoughts. You're watching BBC News. Much more coming up.